Today we're going to talk about slope, and there are three key terms I want you to remember. Obviously, one of them is going to be slope, one of them is going to be ordered pair, and one of them is going to be y-intercept. So keep those in mind as we move forward. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is, what is slope? Slope is simply the steepness of a line. That's all it is. Slope can either be positive or negative. If it's positive, it goes up from left to right. Just like this one, it goes up from left to right. Slope can also be negative, which means it'll go down from left to right, like this, down from left to right. Okay, so how do we calculate slope? Well, it's pretty simple. It's the change in y divided by the change in x. This little triangle here means delta, and it means change in y divided by the change in x, right? So how do we actually do it? We find 2 points on the graph. There's a point right there. There's another point right there. You can mark more points if you like, but you really only need 2. There's also a point right here, this red one. That's a very special point. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So now let's go ahead and label a couple of these points. We'll label this one 2, 4. And we'll label this one right here 4, 5. Now, I called this one 2, 4 here because I went straight down to the x-axis and I saw 2, so I put a 2 there. And then I went over to the y-axis and I saw 4 there, so I put a 4 there. Same with this one. I looked down at the x-axis and I saw 4, so I put a 4 here. And then I went over to the y-axis and I saw 5, so I put a 5 here. Something to remember, when you write an ordered pair, these are ordered pairs, is that the x always comes first and the y always comes next. Just like in the alphabet, x comes before y. So when you write an ordered pair, the x value always comes first. And that's what we did here when we wrote the 2, 4 and the 4, 5. So let's go ahead and label these x and y, and these up here, x and y. Okay, so our first y value is 4. Our second y value is 5. So it goes from 4 to 5 on the y-axis. That's a difference of 1, folks. It goes up from 4 to 5. That's a difference of 1. And then it goes over from here, and our x value here is 2, and it goes over here to 3, 4. It goes from 2 to 4. That's a difference of 2. So our change in x is 2. There's our slope, folks. 1 over 2. We've just calculated slope. Not too hard, was it? So what's all this garbage down here? y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. What is all that? Well, we can label these points x1 and y1, x2 and y2. We can label those like that. Then we can just plug these points in. y2 is 5 and y1 is 4. x2 is 4 and x1 is 2. If we subtract those, we get 1 over 2, which is the same thing we got before. You might want to use this formula if you have some big numbers on a big graph, or if you have some numbers that are decimals or something and it's hard to count up on the graph. The easiest solution is just to count up like we did here. We counted up 1 and we went over 2. So the change in y was 1 over the change in x, which was 2. That's the easiest way to get slope. Some people also refer to slope as rise over run, right? Rise over run, which is exactly what we did here. The change in y over the change in x. Okay, let's add one more element here. One more element. I'm going to write an equation that you're going to need to know because you're going to see it a lot in algebra. Here it is. Y equals mx plus b. That is the equation of a straight line. So, you need to know that little formula because you're going to use it a lot, like I said. So, let's talk about what m equals. M is your slope. That's cool. You know how to get slope now. It's easy. B is a new term that we haven't talked about yet, and that's your y y-intercept. What is the y-intercept? The y-intercept is simply the point on the graph at which your line crosses the y-axis. This line crosses the y-axis right here on the 3. That's that special red point I was talking about earlier. That's our y-intercept. It's the point at which this line crosses the y-axis. It's also the point at which the x value is 0. It's the y value when the x value is 0. In other words, if I were to label this point, it would be 0, 3. So it's the y value of the line when x is 0. Any y-intercept you see is going to have a value like that. It's going to look like this. 0, and then whatever the value of y is, right? Because it's your y-intercept. It's where it crosses the y-axis. Okay, so we know what our slope of this line is, don't we? It's 1/2. We calculated that earlier. And now we know what our y-intercept of this line is because I just told you. It's +3. Y-intercepts can be negative, they can be positive. It's wherever that line on the graph crosses the y-axis, the blue line there. Okay, and then all we got to do to finish this equation off is write y equals, and then bring the x down as well. Y equals 1/2 x plus 3. That is the equation for this line in this graph. How easy is that? So here it is. The equation for this line on this graph. So today you've learned about slope, you've learned about ordered pairs, and you've learned what a y-intercept is. And as an extra added bonus, you've learned how to make an equation from a line on a graph. Pretty cool.